Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megha Kumar. I'm the Research Director for Software and Cloud at IDC. And today I'm going to be moderating a session around blockchain. Right? Now, 2 or 3 years ago, before IDC started looking into blockchain, I think this is, sorry, can we have this clicker working? We'll hold a thought over there. Okay, great. So 2 or 3 years ago, when a lot of organizers, before we started looking at blockchain, I think this is how most of the people in the room felt, right? Every time their board came in and decided to tell you, hey, let's look at blockchain, let's look at AI. And you kept wondering, oh my God, why? Where did they get this buzzword? How are we going to go about it, right? Now, fast forward to 2019, and the thing is that as IDC, as per our latest spending guide, we are projecting that the spend on blockchain will reach nearly $800 million by 2023 alone, right? So clearly, it is no longer seen as a solution that is based entirely around cryptocurrency and so forth. Clearly, there's some enterprise use cases that are taking place. But still, one of the biggest challenges blockchain has is that a lot of people struggle to understand the use cases, right? Struggle to understand why they should think about blockchain. What are the different types of benefits that they could gain from actually implementing blockchain within their ecosystem? And more importantly, is there something in my organization that requires me to implement blockchain? Right? These are the sort of questions that you probably want to ponder over when you think about blockchain. And the thing is, moving forward, this $800 million in spend, a lot of it will be around services. It is to help organizations understand what are the use cases that will ensure that there is a benefit to my customers and to my business, right? And one of the largest growing markets within this spend is going to be around blockchain platforms. These can be industry-level platforms, use case platforms. A lot of tech vendors are actually spending quite a bit in terms of research to ensure that there are these platforms that are made accessible to customers upon which they can actually build out a use case or the technology itself. Right? Now, this is by far the shortest summary I could probably give you in this presentation, because what I really want to do is to have all of you hear from my panelists. Can we go back to the slide over there? So I would like to invite on stage Steve Delaney, who is the CEO and founder of Capital Blockchain. And Philippe Johnston, who is the Director General of Digital Services at Transport Canada. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, again.
Hello. Right. So what I would like to do is I'll start off with a series of questions, then I'll open it up to the audience. Both of these gentlemen are very well versed in the utilization of blockchain. There are quite a few implementations. Experience that they have as well. So I think what I would like to start off with the both of you is saying that many a times when you hear people talk about blockchain, the most common response I get from few people is that it seems like it's a solution looking for a problem, right? So usually that's how people reflect upon it. But what I would like to understand from both of you is when it comes to blockchain, why blockchain, and what can it do better compared to a traditional database or a PKI technology? So maybe Steve?
Want me to start?
Yeah.
Well, I would reframe that particular question about is blockchain a technology looking for a solution. What I believe is there's a lot of very serious business problems, and blockchain may perhaps be the solution for some of those business problems. So if you've got a particular business problem and you're looking for a distributed ledger technology where the records and the data is kept in there, it's immutable, it's transparent, it's traceable, it's encrypted. Blockchain may be the solution to solve that particular business problem.
Okay. Philippe?
Well, I'll take it from Transport Canada perspective. So yesterday I didn't really explain our business, and you may or may not know it, but we want to ensure the safety of the transportation system. So safety is you guys and people around this room who utilize. The security as well, kind of linked to the safety. Security meaning no explosives, no terrorists, et cetera, getting on our planes. We also have a very important piece of that mission, which is efficiency of the transportation system. How can we make it more efficient so we can drive more business to Canada, more imports or exports or what have you? So on those three fronts, from our perspective at Transport Canada, the blockchain technology makes a lot of sense. I'll just give you an efficiency perspective. Right now, when a ship comes to port and it has to give its ledger or like all the information about what it has on there, the amount of paperwork and the amount of transactions and people that have to be called to make sure that the ship can actually come to port, very inefficient right now.
Right.
And so, for example, Transport Canada definitely wants to get involved in this because they see an opportunity to leverage what potentially the Maersks and the IBMs have already started to do in terms of running the cargo and running the efficient supply of goods across the country. So what could happen there is pre-port, we could, on the blockchain, validate and provide our responses together in a closed ecosystem of the blockchain of trusted vendors, trusted governments, trusted regulators, and that could so totally streamline the transportation of these goods and the entry into the country. So that's one example that, at least from my perspective, would be a great example for transportation that we're looking at. And I think there are going to be a lot of values. It'll change the whole perspective on people having to log into systems or log and look at data. It changes it and makes it real time with the data actually being on the blockchain. Right. People being able to access it at any point in time, make decisions, and even contribute to it.
Right, right. And, this is clearly a good use case that you mentioned out there. And earlier this morning, we heard a use case around food quality. We also heard from the Calgary Drop-In Center as to how they're utilizing blockchain. But a lot of times people assume that blockchain is limited to a certain set of industries, right? And a certain set of use cases. But from both your experiences, what are the different kinds of use cases that are up and coming that you think the audience should be purview to understand the expansiveness of the technology?
Sure, I'd be glad to give you a couple of examples. And I've heard a lot of examples in the last year and a half ever since I went into blockchain full time. And prior to that, I was sitting in your seat. I was a CIO 3 times in the public and the private sector, so I know exactly what you're going through. And as I think it was Elizabeth said earlier, your bosses come to you and they say you should take a look at blockchain, and you're really not sure what to do with it. And it isn't the answer for everything. But in the last year and a half, I spent a lot of time looking at various use cases, built solutions both in Hyperledger Fabric and Ethereum. And some of the great use cases in the future are in healthcare. We talked a lot about healthcare at the conference. So, for example, when I fly back to Toronto tomorrow, and say from the airport to my home, I'm in a traffic accident, they take me to the hospital, I'm lying on a gurney, dying, and so the emergency room doc goes into my wallet, he takes out my OHIP card, and what can he find out about me? The most he could find out is if I've had an X-ray or a CAT scan or an MRI, he goes into OLIS, the Ontario Lab Information System, and he pulls up that information. He has no access to my doctor's records. He has no access to what drugs I might be taking at Shoppers or Rexall or any pharmacy or any other medical treatment that I've been getting. So what does he do? He runs thousands of dollars worth of perhaps unnecessary tests while I'm dying. So if we could have healthcare records on blockchain through APIs where you pull out the data from the various sources that are out there and provide a comprehensive picture of a patient's health, I mean, that's a tremendous use case. So Estonia, which we talked about yesterday, has got all their healthcare records, but it's only a country with 1.3 million people, so it's easy. But now Australia has their healthcare records on blockchain, and Sweden's doing some trials in it as well. So healthcare is a good example. Real estate's another great example. Real estate is the largest asset class in the world. And for most of us, your home is your biggest asset that you own. So you go to sell your home, and you're basically putting the home up for sale in the hands of a complete stranger, the listing agent. You have no idea what bids are coming in. You have to trust your listing agent is listing your home and giving you all of the bids. So, But think about if all of those bids were on blockchain and you had a portal as a seller and you could go into that particular ledger to see all the bids that have been logged against your house, it would take all the fraud out of the system. So recently I met with the CEO of the Toronto Real Estate Board, John D. Michel, and TREB is the largest real estate board in the world with 62,000 real estate agents. So he has an RFQ coming out this fall to put all real estate transactions on blockchain. So another good example. Phil mentioned Maersk. Maersk is the largest shipping container company in the world out of Copenhagen. And at any particular time, I read coming to this conference, there's about 5,000 huge cargo ships in the ocean. And they average about 20,000 containers. So do the math, it's about 100 million containers. So they're looking, and they lose track of these, and there's a lot of perishable goods on these containers. So they're looking at solutions like blockchain to have the manifest of all those ships so they can track those containers at any particular time.
Right. And Philippe, you mentioned during our conversations yesterday about some of the blockchain work that you're doing within Transport Canada, something that you would like to share. I particularly like the fact that it's along the lines of identity.
Yeah, it's along the lines of identity. We struck up, we're working with the World Economic Forum and also with the Netherlands, KLM, Air Canada, Toronto, Montreal, and I always forget the name of that airport in the Netherlands. Somebody's probably, was it Schiphol? Schiphol, yeah, that's it. And so in April 2020, we're going to be leveraging the Known Traveler Digital Identity program to allow for a more seamless flow of people like yourselves to travel between those two countries. So how that's going to work is there'll be biometric kiosks at the airports at both sides of the border. And what we'll do with both our partners in the Netherlands and internally, work with CBSA, ourselves, to validate the traveler prior to the person going forward on their travel. And with this biometric kiosk and registering with this app, we're going to register the fact that both CBSA and ourselves think this traveler is trusted and can travel on the blockchain. And then through the app and the API, the airlines will be able to see that information, say, hey, this person can just go right through a biometric facial recognition. So, I mean, that's one example, and it's coming. It will be live, you know, if you travel to that airport. And I invite you guys to download the app when it goes live in April 2020 if you're traveling back and forth from the Netherlands. You know, it's our first pilot, so what I think I do want to mention, it's not as easy as just putting it on the blockchain. I think we discussed that a little bit here. I do want to reassure people that, you know, we have a ton of lawyers on this thing. We have a ton of privacy impact assessments being done on this thing. We want to make sure that your biometric is not going to be hacked and not going to be used elsewhere. And it'll be an opt-in process as well. So that's actually where most of the work is going into the program, and integrating it with some of our internal systems that we have within the government. Okay. So really looking forward to that. That's kind of the first step, I think. And if that goes well, you know, we'd hope to expand that for not just those airports and for all Canadians.
Oh, wow. That's great. Now, before I go on to my next set of questions, I would like to actually open it up to the audience. So does anyone from the audience have a question for the panelists? Yeah. Could we get a mic, please? Yeah.
Thank you. Rami Hindiya, GTAA. So I'm aware of the KDDI initiative, and it's a big one. The other initiative that we've been working on with blockchain has been around the spirit of the IATA 753 resolution, which is all about tracking bags. Nothing to do with the actual transparency of tracking the bags, but the ultimate questions that come my way are questions around the governance of blockchain, whether it's public, whether it's private, and who administers it. And what are your thoughts on that in terms of Transport Canada's role for these kind of things?
Okay. So, so right now, I mean, this is our blockchain. You know, it's a private blockchain. It's not a public blockchain. CBSA and ourselves are working together, potentially with IRCC as well, to administer and manage this blockchain. So we control who has access to it, who can write to it, who can, I mean, I'll just leave it at that. And then we publish it only to those known entities through secure mechanisms, so they can use that blockchain for those purposes. I don't know if that answers your question. The Government of Canada hasn't come out with a big, I guess, position paper yet on blockchain in terms of how it's going to use this. We're one of the first that are going to be piloting this. We're going to be providing all of our lessons learned, the legal issues, the privacy issues, as part of this pilot to the Government of Canada, so that they can develop a probably more wholesome policy on this and how they want to manage that for the Government of Canada. I know if that answers your question. That's where we're at right now. We're not much further than that, as far as I know, for the Government of Canada.
Could we use it as a foundational model for other initiatives with blockchain? Because again, I'm working with airports like in Montreal and Edmonton, right? And because we are the biggest airport, these questions always come my way. And ultimately, I'm looking for maybe an intermediary that could administer the blockchain without one airport being seen to run the show, so to speak, from that perspective. And Transport Canada would be a great intermediary in that regard.
So we haven't made that policy decision yet, so I'm not going to comment. It's definitely something that, if that makes sense, and it looks like we could be a good impartial provider of this without showing favoritism to Air Canada, WestJet, or Porter, or any airport. Definitely, it's probably one of the things we're going to be looking at as part of this pilot.
Something to consider.
Yeah.
Quick question. I read about the KTDAI, and it seems like the more information you feed it, the more trusted you get. Like, for example, if you upload your university degree, can you elaborate a bit on that? I just wasn't sure what was meant by that one. The paper published by Accenture, I think, or whoever was working.
No, and I do want to say that, we're not going to ask. We're going to need specific pieces of information, and no one's going to be treated differently. We're not going to ask for more information, and if you get more information, you get a better experience.
Yes, yeah.
I just wanted to dispel that what you read. That is not what's going to happen, or there's not going to be any privileged traveler for this program. Yeah.
Great.
If we can't identify you, though, then you can't be part of the program. So we need basic information to understand who you are, so that we can allow you to go through and leverage this opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Sure.
Roy Hart with BCIT in Vancouver. I was just curious, do you think that we'll ever get a single national identity card that works in the digital world and the physical world?
I've been in government for 15 years, and they're still talking about the same thing they were talking about 15 years ago. There's so many jurisdictions, so many, can you share my data with this person? It's the sharing of the data until somebody kind of comes up with a single identity that everyone's okay with sharing with everybody else.
Yeah.
In this particular case, we're using the passport, which is a very logical and easy. So could we leverage the passport as a piece of identity for everybody? IRCC has not even gone to the legal or policy issues that might be around that particular piece. But for traveling, it definitely makes sense, and because we're used to that, and that's what it's used for. I hear that people are developing strategies, and they will solve this problem, etc. I just don't see the three municipal, provincial, federal. Personally, right now, I still don't see, we're all working together and we're going to come up with a solution by this date, and kind of challenging themselves. Till I hear that, I think that's the type of language that would tell me, and then that would be really helpful for our blockchain if we wanted to leverage that within Canada for all our other services, like to the ones Steve mentioned. I know everyone's got a good heart and everyone has good intentions. I just think we've grown up with a lot of rules and policies and laws that make it really hard for all that sharing of data to happen.
Yeah. So and also I think, if you think about it, Canada is a very large country. And as you mentioned, the different types of governments as well. There are governments across the world that are thinking of putting a lot of citizen services on blockchain. But even in their cases, they don't put it on a public blockchain. It's a private blockchain, so there are a limited number of nodes that are actually governed. So that kind of tells you as to even governments try to think about security and privacy at the same time, and they need to have all the right stakeholders actually agreeing onto that as well. So we have one more question from the audience. Yes.
Yeah, I'm already having trouble in explaining to my business executives as to what is cloud, what's agile, what's DevOps. I can't understand myself, can't keep up with it. Now you're bringing up blockchain as well too. Can you tell me in the business language, how do I sell this idea of blockchain? What exactly does this mean to the business executives?
Yeah. Steve, I think you should take this.
You want me to take this one?
Yeah.
Blockchain has been confused with cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And there's 2,000 cryptocurrencies out there, and it's been tarnished with that kind of cryptocurrency thing. And I have no use for cryptocurrency myself because I only invest in investments that are backed by real assets. So you've got to get your executives out of the mindset of cryptocurrency. And then what I consider blockchain is good for two things. And one of them we talked about a fair bit today and yesterday is supply chain. We talked about, unfortunately, the fish example earlier from Sam, and there's a whole bunch of others that we've talked about. They're putting land titles in Dubai on blockchain. Driver's licenses in Florida are on blockchain. We talked about healthcare on blockchain, real estate on blockchain, Transport Canada information. So that's the supply chain side of the house. So if you have a particular process in the mortgage industry or whatever, where there's a lot of touch points and a lot of friction, blockchain may be a solution to get rid of some of the intermediaries along that whole supply chain. So you've got to take a look at your supply chain and to see, are there problem points here that a distributed ledger, without all those intermediaries, could it solve that? One day, I could buy Phil's house in Dunrobin, and I could send him, say, $2 million for his house over blockchain in any currency I want, whether it's fiat or a cryptocurrency. It's approved by my lawyer on my side. Phil receives it on his side. He can get that currency in anything that he wants, the payment for his house, and all the banks and everybody are out of the picture. That's eventually going to happen. You're going to see
I accept your offer.
You accept the offer.
I accept your offer, Steve, okay, begrudgingly, but I will accept your offer.
Okay.
And I'll move somewhere else.
So to answer your question, if you have a particular business, like the mortgage industry hasn't been touched in years. I just came, I was CIO of my last job, over $80 billion mortgage company. Mortgages haven't been changed in years. The legal practice hasn't been changed in years. Paper everywhere for a lot of these. So if you see that there's particular areas within your supply chain that could benefit from blockchain, you should tell your executives you want to explore it. The other area of blockchain, which we haven't discussed over the last 2 days, and you're really going to hear about this in the future, is what they call security token offerings. Mm-hmm. Blockchain is an alternative funding model to raise capital through the issuing of tokens. They're like a prospectus on a new IPO of a share, but both government and the private sector are thinking about using STOs to raise capital. For example, there's a big city in Toronto. I met with the 2 deputy mayors. They wanted to raise $100 million to build 4 community centers and a bridge. And they're thinking about using a security token offer platform like Ethereum to have the citizens of that particular city, with a kind of a tagline, invest where you live, to buy tokens in their community, and it's backed in the smart contract with the dividend payment and redemption policies and all of that. So governments now around the world are starting to look at using STOs and blockchain as a vehicle to raise capital. So say, I don't know, you're in Sri Lanka and you want to build an airport and it's $1 billion and your government has $200 million. You could raise $800 million for completing that airport through security tokens that are backed by the government, like a micro bond, and citizens from around the world could invest in those, not tied to any stock exchange, available to be traded 7/24. So it's a new way to raise capital. So what I would explain, if I'm explaining blockchain in an elevator pitch, it's a great way to solve some supply chain issues, and it's a new alternative funding model for raising capital.
I'll just add that I really see blockchain as a new way, a new database, a new way of thinking about data and databases as well. Like having to come to my database, or me having to share my data, or it's very cumbersome with the blockchain. one other examples, we get the manifest cargoes from all the people bringing in their cargo. We need to tell the airline before the cargo goes that, hey, there's no explosives. We don't think there's any explosives. We don't need to inspect that aircraft. So you could see us and CBSA, if they were doing it for contraband or drugs or what have you, see us working together to both write on the blockchain to tell the airline in real time, with AI, whether we think there's anything wrong with that cargo. So that's another one. Another big one would be licensing and licenses. So we provide the licenses for all the pilots in Canada. What if we could write the fact that we approved that these 10,000 pilots in Canada are approved? If they, right now, moving from one airline to the other, it's a big paperwork exercise for these pilots. What if we wrote that once to the blockchain, allowed Porter and Air Canada just to leverage that, and we made that open on the blockchain? So I see it about distributed data and secured, authenticated, not changed data, and so for the immutable part. So in other words, that's, I think, as well an interesting piece of where I think the blockchain can do that. It distributes everything and creates a more efficient economy. I think in the end of the day, if you know who your players are, you could probably create a much more efficient economy than creating apps for people to log into and see, or even not even being digital in the first place.
Right. So both of you have explained to everybody in the room as to how they should pitch blockchain to the business. So from your respective experiences, what are the challenges of implementing blockchain?
Well, there's a number of them, and this gentleman identified one, and that's explaining blockchain to your colleagues in the business, the other business leaders. One is integrating it with legacy technology. That's another challenge, I would say. And then the other part is, do you have the skills to actually do it? Now, the one good thing about blockchain, when you develop a blockchain solution, the blockchain piece itself is only about 20% of the solution. You still need a UI, UX, you still have regular programming, you still have databases, you still got to operationalize it, you still got to put it up in data centers and make sure it's production worthy and everything else. But the blockchain piece is about 20%. And if you're building a solution with Ethereum, you have to have a particular skill set to develop the smart contract code called Solidity. So you have to kind of get that skill set in. So you have to have the skills to do a full end-to-end solution in blockchain. So I would say having the skills, convincing your colleagues in the business it's a good solution, then integrating it with legacy technology. I'm sure there's others, but those are the top three I could think of.
Okay.
Well, it's a new technology, so right away it scares people. It's risky. I don't know how proven it is in the courts yet, like legally in terms of challenges. So from my perspective, it's a very interesting legal problem that you need to fix. I think you got to find the right solutions that you might be able to do pilots with, or start understanding how it could help certain parts of your business. You got to develop potentially the skill sets and the education in your area, and I think that's probably it. You have to be a forward-thinking organization if you're going to even think about starting this, because if you can't even get the basics right, you're probably not going to be presenting blockchain as one of your solutions.
Right. Any questions from the audience? So then moving on, so we've spoken about implementation, we've spoken about the fact that we have to convince the board, but how would an organization assess if their blockchain project has been a success? What are the metrics or the KPIs that you would recommend that an organization think about? Right?
Well, you'd probably see some immediate improvements in your supply chain operations. You could see reduction in costs. Timing would be better. I mean, the healthcare example I gave, you get immediate. If doctors could have access to a comprehensive view of patients' records, he can give faster and cheaper treatment. Like in Ontario, healthcare is 42% of the provincial budget, because nobody talks to anybody. When I was CIO of the Ontario Telemedicine Network a few years ago, there were 2,400 separate healthcare organizations just in Ontario. Nobody talked, nobody shared data, highly inefficient, and a huge cost to the taxpayers. If we make the system more effective and we share data, not just in healthcare but other areas, I think we could reduce costs significantly. So I think you could judge the success of your blockchain project on, are you reducing costs, are you providing better service to your customers?
Right. Right. Now, Philippe, let me change this a bit. Now, you mentioned that in 2020 you'll go live with one of your blockchain use cases. What were the few things you wish you knew before you started looking at blockchain?
Well, I'm not. What I knew about blockchain?
No, before you started to take your organization down the path of utilizing blockchain. What are the few
I think
things
we're
you wish you
still
knew?
learning right
Okay.
now. I will say one thing for yourself. I actually, we talk about how learning is really important to us, and I know I talked about emotional intelligence and being a CMO instead of a CIO, but I also did mention being technology proficient is important, and I went out and I did, on Coursera, the free IBM Blockchain Certification course. It probably took me 5-6 weeks of time, on my own time doing. And so what I do recommend is, and I did that back in January, just because I wanted to be able to explain it. I wanted to be able to, in fact, more importantly, when I was talking with the business, I want to be really prepared to say, hey, that without hesitation and with confidence, that looks like a really good use case for blockchain, and maybe we can go and try that.
Right.
So it's not, I guess I'm not saying what I would have done differently, but I'm telling you that for new technologies as CIOs, like if we've been involved in technology for a while, doing courses like this, they're not above your head, and if you just put the effort and the time into it, can be really valuable at the business table because you can then articulate it. So obviously when I'm at the business table, I'm articulating it not in the way that, hey, it's this is this type of encryption, and it's you need these many nodes to make it a valid transaction, etc. But the point being, understanding where those use cases that Steve put together has probably helped us in our organization try to take those steps because people have confidence in the fact that it can be done, and there's an opportunity there, and it makes sense.
Okay, great. So, yes, go on.
So I'm thinking about Steve's example of the EMR records. How do you manage the access layers? So as you're checking into a hospital, let's say in that scenario, and receptionist just needs to know over there that what's your date of birth, what's your medical insurance, so on and so forth. Nurse needs a different level of access, and a specialist needs a different level of access. So are there platforms today that have that access layer built in, or you're building on top of that?
Well, I personally haven't built a solution in healthcare yet, although I'm finishing my PhD off in blockchain in healthcare. I got a year left to do that, so I'm getting into the field and trying to understand it. And I haven't examined what Estonia and Australia have done in terms of those layers. We know it's a permission-based blockchain. It's not a public blockchain, so it's a private blockchain. Consent will have to be a consent mechanism built into it. It's like patients will have to give consent, perhaps, for the sharing of data. And to your point, is a really good point, is what are the various levels that the healthcare professionals will have access to? Would somebody at the receptionist who books appointments have the same access as a surgeon who's going to treat you for something? So that hasn't been built yet, as far as I know. Certainly not in Canada, as far as I know. But it's a really good question.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Sorry. Okay. One here and then.
Any thoughts on technologies or use cases to explicitly stay away from? Everyone talks about what could I apply it to. What about things to stay away from? There are obviously inherent limitations in blockchain. Transactions per second, max number of writes, some things to stay away from. Thoughts on that?
Good question.
It's a really good question.
And you got me.
I would say the one thing Phil's thinking. Yeah. If you want a public blockchain and you want high transactions to go through it, we always use Visa as an example, right? They average about 2,000 transactions per second, and it can get as high as 20,000, I guess, during maybe Christmas period or something. So if you want a public blockchain, and say you're running it on Ethereum and you want high transaction volumes of maybe hundreds or thousands per second, you couldn't go there. It doesn't have that level of scalability yet, that performance. But they're working on it. So if you want high transaction volumes per second, then go to a private blockchain.
I'm still thinking. It's not that. I mean, like I'm just looking for opportunities where it would make sense. Obviously, it's not for everything. So, and so I guess in my brain, I just kind of discount those, and I haven't really like it's kind of like a quick thought process. It's not a good strategic perspective. I do remember when the course I took online, they did give us a whole bunch of examples, and today I can't remember every one of those. So that's
Well, I would usually recommend that, when it comes to innovative tech and use cases, it usually depends on the type of industry that you're in. You can't generally say if a use case is something that you should avoid per se. It would really depend on the industry and the size of business that you actually are as to evaluating if that is the right fit for you. There are certain organizations where, their supply chain might be so efficient that it just does not make sense for them to actually reinvent it and put it on a blockchain kind of thing. Whereas for organizations such as MERS and some of the other examples that we heard today, it just made sense because they were able to authenticate the quality of the product. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
With the distributed nature of it.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
With the distributed nature of it, do you feel that for IT professionals, people managing infrastructure, et cetera, it makes it more difficult for disaster recovery, high availability, backup and recovery, et cetera?
Well, actually, the blockchain is distributed, so it is providing you with even supposedly more disaster recovery than if you just had that in your database in your data center. So you have to design, let's say the government of Canada decides to design, the GC blockchain, for example. It'll be highly distributed. There won't be even single, triple, quadruple points of failure. It'll be highly distributed and robust for disaster recovery. That is actually one of the main selling features of the blockchain. But I think that's, I guess I'm kind of saying that I don't think that's going to be an issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. And I think with that, we're good for time. And I must say, thank you both of you for sharing your insights, especially with regards to use cases, some of the challenges, and also what organizations should prepare themselves for when it comes to talking about why they should utilize blockchain. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.